Hello and welcome back to Diddy on Trial from the BBC World Service YouTube channel. We're here, it's day one, and Diddy's family have just arrived. Just a warning, this episode contains descriptions of violence, sexual violence, and graphic descriptions of sex. Sean Diddy Combs is accused of sex trafficking, transportation for prostitution, and racketeering with conspiracy. He denies all the charges and says he's never sexually assaulted anyone, man or woman, adult or minor. If found guilty, he could end up spending the rest of his life behind bars.
So we just came out of court after hearing the prosecution and the defence's opening statements. Now, we've told you before, this is where they try and win over the jury. And for the defense, it was where they were trying to endear Sean Combs to the jury. I'm here with Neda Tawfiq, who is the New York correspondent for the BBC. Neda, first of all, let's start with the prosecution as they went first. What did they have to say?
Yeah, it was interesting because they started off with this dramatic flair pointing right to Sean Diddy Combs and painting him really as, this larger than life icon, but saying that behind that there was another side to him, one where he used his celebrity, his power, really his entire business to force victims into unconsensual sex. And they started off by painting the picture of one night where they said he was essentially in a rage. He was on the hunt for his girlfriend, the R&B singer Cassie. And they say he kind of got wind that she was going to be with another man, and he went to one of his employees, grabbed them out of bed, forced them to go with a security guard in their SUV to the man's home, broke in, and when they found they weren't there, went off again to look for Cassie. And they depict how when he finally found Cassie, that he brutally beat her, flung her around like a rag doll. And they used that one night to paint the picture of what they say happened over 20 years, not just to Cassie, but to another woman named Jane, who they say the jury will hear from, and also an employee named Mia that they say the jury will hear from. And they say he was somebody who referred to himself as a king and expected to be treated like one, had impossible demands. So really setting the tone of the kind of character they want them to see. Some really graphic testimony just about how this was not a case about celebrity sexual preferences, that this was about coercion and control. They say that Cassie, that only one person had power in that relationship, and it was Diddy, not her, that he forced her into these freak-offs that she didn't enjoy at all, but she felt she had no choice. That in one instance, she almost felt like she was choking because he had a male prostitute urinate in her mouth. I mean, just to give you a sense of some of the graphic detail that we're going to be hearing over these next few weeks. And essentially, they say that this went on for years and years because he had financial control of her life, that she felt she couldn't escape. Again, that she was physically abused throughout this relationship. So, as you say, so much really hinges on Cassie and the testimony, and of course, that video, that CCTV footage from that LA hotel in 2016. We're going to be hearing from the prosecution. They introduced that.
As part of this, they talk about the freak-offs, and we've heard about the freak-offs a lot all over social media, and they define them as these drug-fueled days-long orgies with commercial male sex workers. Now with Cassie, they say that she took drugs and at one point she overdosed, but they also talk about Jane, who was a single mom in a relationship with him. What did they have to say about her and the freak-offs and the drug taking?
Yeah, what's really important with Jane is they say this all happened not even a year ago, this relationship with Jane. As you say, single mother, she wanted to have a relationship with him, but it wasn't so public in the way it was with Cassie. Now, prosecutors said that she will testify that shortly into their relationship, he asked her to take part in these freak-offs. And she initially agreed, but was surprised that he wanted to set one up quickly. They say that it was his employees that got the drugs, and that Jane, at one point, after taking the drugs and being forced to have sex with a male prostitute, that she actually threw up because she was so disturbed by it. She didn't like it at all, they said. And they said that Diddy told her, "You're not going to mess up my night. Get back in here and finish." And also with Jane, they tried to, again, depict that there was a pattern here, that he also was physically abusive with her, saying at one point during an altercation between the two that, they both got upset, that he grabbed her by her throat and picked her up in a chokehold and then threw her to the ground. So another case where they're trying to depict how, again, this was something that he did not just with Cassie, but with other women.
Something else that perhaps we haven't seen as much about in relation to the Freakoffs is the fact that these alleged victims, the prosecution say, were responsible then for organising them. What do they have to say about that?
Yeah, I mean, that's a real interesting piece of this, right? Because they say that these women felt like if they didn't do exactly what he said, that there would be consequences. And so he allegedly forced them to source the male escorts, to plan out certain details. They say there was a very kind of strict way he liked things. He wanted dark hotel rooms. He wanted the women in lingerie. He wanted them in high heels. They talked about the baby oil, the drugs, and how this would go on for days and they would have to recover with IVs to rehydrate. But again, this element of the women being forced to orchestrate this all to kind of do what he said to please him.
And they talk about, in relation to the force element of the charge, so force, fraud, or coercion, force, the threats of violence, and violence. At some points, Cassie in particular, having suffered assaults and suffered bruising, and then being kept in hotel rooms. What else do they have to say about that?
In 2009, there was an incident they also described in their opening statements where Diddy allegedly threw Cassie in a vehicle and stomped on her face repeatedly. So they describe how brutal this was for Cassie and how it left a big bruise on her face. And what did he do? They say he was so concerned about maintaining his reputation. He was seen in public really as this charismatic, lovable figure, right? Very at odds with the character they were depicting in these opening statements. And they say that what he did at that point was force her into a hotel room. And he had a staff member stand guard outside for days until her bruise got better so she wouldn't be seen in public at that time with that bruise when people knew they were together in a long relationship.
And that's the overarching message that the prosecution were introducing as well. He could not do this alone. There was an inner circle of people who were supporting him and helping him cover this up. What did they have to say about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think mostly everyone who's aware of this case, if not everyone, has seen, again, the hotel CCTV footage in 2016 of Diddy beating Cassie. Now, they say, take that instance. Diddy got his chief of staff, got his bodyguard, showed up to the hotel, tried to get one security guard with a wad of cash to try to buy the video from him, then went to a different security guard and they said showed up with a brown bag filled with $100,000 and successfully bought that footage. So just showing again how there were people around him that would do whatever he asked, that he had the wealth and power to protect himself. And when you think about that power dynamic, again, going back to this idea that Cassie didn't have the power in the relationship, he was the one who had.
But it is a completely different story that we got from the defense, and it starts in quite a unique way. How did they choose to begin?
Yeah, I'm not sure I've ever seen a case actually where in the opening the defense asks the defendant to stand up and look at the jury. And so you had Sean Combs in a gray sweater with a white top under it, his hair, visibly grayer than we remember him in his, bad boy days, stands up and looks to the jury. And essentially what the defense is trying to say is we're not going to shy away from anything that he has done. They admit to domestic violence. They admit to the fact that he was a jealous boyfriend, that he was with many women at once, that he, committed infidelity. But what they say essentially is that none of that is sex trafficking. So there were terms and phrases they used often, painting the alleged victims as strong, capable women that had a choice, that this was the choice they made to stay with him. And then when they decided to leave him, that was their choice as well. Saying that, they're not going to shy away from the fact that there was jealousy in the relationships. But they say there was no coercion, that it was all consensual. So again, trying to basically say to the jury, he's a flawed man, and that's not a crime. If domestic abuse was what was charged here, that would be one thing. But what he's being charged with is sex trafficking and RICO charges, and they say the evidence just will not prove that.
And they went a long way in saying he's going to own these mistakes that he's made. He's going to own this domestic violence, own these incidences of aggression. They also went away in owning some of the stuff that we've heard, the baby oil, the high heels, the freak offs. What did they have to say about that?
Yeah, they said, look, we know he's a fan of baby oil, even in a flippant way. And the reason they brought that up is because they said the press has painted this in a completely different light than the reality. So they wanted to kind of, in a way, almost make light of what the jurors have heard in the press before. So, they say, look, it's important to remember that, yeah, he's a fan of baby oil. There's no crime there. The way he, likes to have these sexual encounters might not be to your taste. It might even make you uncomfortable. But look, there's nothing illegal about that. And yes, these were toxic relationships. You're going to see and hear voice notes and text messages with him and these women. Again, you might think he's a jerk, they said. You might think he's a mean guy. So again, trying to paint him as a flawed individual, but not someone who should be held criminally accountable.
Another piece of evidence, again, back to this video, this 2016 video. What did they have to say about the tape that was leaked by CNN?
Yeah, so they're saying essentially that the press hasn't put out the whole story, that this was a toxic, dysfunctional relationship, and almost putting the blame a little bit on Cassie. They're saying what you didn't get out of that video was that when he was running after her, what he was after was his phone, and that Cassie had stolen his phone from him, and that once he got it, he kind of sat down and put his head in his hands and kind of realized what he had done. And they're saying that to them is evidence that this isn't about sex trafficking, that he didn't grab her and try to bring her back to the hotel room because of sex trafficking, that it was about him wanting his phone. So again, painting this as a domestic violence incident and saying that all of it was because of the jealousy in the relationship. So saying that him and Cassie that day had a fight about kind of seeing, stuff in the press she didn't like, and it was all about jealousy. And again, that this was a situation where it was a personal dispute between two people.
So we're not sure what's going to happen for the rest of the day. They've hinted that victim one might appear. We know a male escort's going to give some testimony. I know you've got to go back inside, but we'll catch up with you later.
Yeah, let's see if Cassie testifies today. All right, thanks so much.
See ya.
So we knew we were going to get opening statements today from the prosecution and the defense, but I didn't expect there to be quite so many captivating witnesses, and there really were. It was quite an intense witness testimony that we had. I've got Neda Tawfiq with me, the New York correspondent, who's going to go through what we heard from a male escort.
This was Daniel Phillip. He worked in the adult industry and said he met Cassie in 2012 when his boss told him that he got a request to have somebody go dance at a bachelorette party, and he couldn't find anybody else, so Daniel agreed. What Daniel didn't expect when he arrived was that the job would be quite different. He didn't realize he was meeting Cassie at the time. She answered the door at the Gramercy Hotel where he was instructed to go in red lingerie, a red wig, big glasses, and heels. And she asked him if he would be up for, having a little fun with someone she described as her husband. She said that he wanted to do something special for her, that he wanted to have Daniel rub his wife in baby oil and just see where the night went. He says when he went into the room, he saw the husband. Again, he didn't know at the time it was Sean Combs, in a corner with a baseball cap and a bandana kind of covering the lower half of his face. And he said that within minutes of kind of rubbing baby oil on Cassie, they had sex. And he said that in the corner was this man ejaculating while watching them have sex. He said he left quickly after that. But then he said Cassie got in touch with him, asked him for certain explicit photos, and asked if he would be open to doing it again after handing him a lot of money. Now, he said after that, he went back, and this happened a few times over the course of several years. He said this went on until about late 2013, early 2014.
But they also start to talk about other things that Cassie in particular asked him to do. What kind of stuff did they detail?
Diddy would sometimes say, you're not using enough baby oil, use more baby oil, go slower, or tell him, don't come yet. But there were times where he said the requests were slightly odder than even that. He said that one time Cassie was the one who asked him to urinate on her, and that Diddy and her instructed him on how to do it. So that was kind of one of the more graphic details. But then as testimony went on, you also saw the prosecution trying to get into why he stopped engaging with them, and that was quite telling.
Yeah, so that switch that he talks about, I mean, he details not having a bad time. I mean, he went back, he did it again of his own free will, and then it comes to a halt in about 2013, 2014, and he says that he was having performance-related issues. But he spoke specifically about when that started. What did he say?
Yeah, that's right. He said that once he saw Diddy beat Cassie, he could no longer, perform and be engaged, because before, he said, even if they hadn't paid him, he was excited to be part of their world. He was enjoying that kind of activity with them. And then things started changing when he saw one time he was on the couch, Cassie was at her computer, and Diddy, he said, was in Cassie's bedroom. Now, Diddy apparently called out to Cassie to come into the bedroom, and she allegedly told him, just hold on a second, my personal information's on the computer. Now, Daniel describes being absolutely shocked when all of a sudden a liquor bottle, Diddy throws it from across the room right toward Cassie, and then he comes running towards her, grabs her by her hair, drags her into her bedroom, and tells her, when I tell you to come, you don't wait, you just come when I tell you. And he says he then heard, after the doors closed, Diddy slapping her, beating her, yelling at her, and Cassie screaming out, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. And he says he was just kind of frozen in place. He didn't know what to do. And prosecutors asked him, why didn't you intervene? Why didn't you go inside? And he said, look, I know this is somebody with a lot of resources. Quite frankly, I was afraid for my life. Now, that drew a lot of objections from the defense, but the judge allowed that testimony. And he again reiterated that he was scared in that moment for Cassie, feeling like she was in a dangerous situation, but he didn't feel it was safe enough for him to intervene.
And he talks about another instance of violence where Cassie runs from the room and kind of jumps into his lap, and she's shaking, and he tries to speak to her and say, well, why are you staying with this man? What are you doing? And she tries to reassure him, I'm fine, I'm fine. He does speak to a bit of a friendship building up between the two of them and expressed that he was quite worried about her.
Yeah, it's interesting because he kind of talks about throughout that he tried to kind of stay in text communications with Cassie just to make sure she's okay. But that particular instance, he had already described how Cassie was tiny compared to Diddy. He already described how Diddy would lose his temper in those moments and it would shock him. So that imagery of Cassie running to him, jumping in his lap and just visibly shaking and him trying to console her, she basically told him, don't worry about me, I'll be fine. And he said he just couldn't convince her to leave him, but he very much thought that she was in danger if she stayed in that relationship.
This was a really packed day because we had peremptory strikes in the morning, then opening statements, then the security officer, and now the testimony of this male escort. So by the time he took the stand, it was like 4:30. So what exactly did we hear from cross-examination, if anything?
Yeah, it was very brief to start, just in terms of having him reestablish certain things that he said in his original testimony. And then they tried to go after his credibility a little bit through that line of questioning. But look, it was very much just touching the surface. I think when court resumes tomorrow, there will be much more on a cross-examination, and we'll see whether they go even harder and pinpoint any place where they can have jurors find reasonable doubt.
Neda, thank you so much for coming and breaking that down for us today, and we'll see you back here tomorrow where we expect to hear testimony from Cassie.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's it for this episode of Diddy on Trial from the BBC World Service YouTube channel. Make sure you subscribe so you never miss a thing, and thanks for watching.